The alien princess wept, rejecting the ruthless human her father had. Chosen Princess Velith stood frozen in her father's throne room as the words echoed in her mind. Marriage to a human. Her silver skin grew pale, and her 4 eyes blinked rapidly as she tried to understand what Emperor Sindel IV had just announced. The council members around her shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and she could feel their gazes upon her trembling form. "Father, you cannot be serious," she whispered, her voice breaking like fragile glass. The Emperor's face remained stern as he looked down at his only daughter. His golden robes seemed heavier today, and the crown upon his elongated head appeared to weigh more than usual. He had ruled the Sindari Empire for 300 cycles and had never looked so tired. "The Varax Collective has declared war upon us, my child," he said in a voice that carried both authority and sorrow. "Their fleet outnumbers ours 4-1. Without allies, our people will be enslaved within 6 lunar cycles." Velith's heart pounded against her chest. She had heard the reports of Varax's cruelty and knew what fate awaited conquered species. But surely there had to be another way. "Why humans?" she demanded, stepping forward with clenched fists. "Of all the species in the galaxy, why must you choose those monsters?" Councillor Marith rose from his seat, his wrinkled face grave with concern. He was the oldest advisor in the chamber and had witnessed many terrible things across his long life. "Your Highness, I understand your fear," he said slowly. "The humans are indeed terrifying. Their homeworld is a death planet where everything tries to kill them. They evolved to survive poison air, crushing gravity, and predators with razor teeth. They do not stop when wounded. They chase prey until it collapses from exhaustion. They are persistence hunters, and their endurance is legendary." Another counselor named Desik nodded eagerly, his scales rippling with nervous energy. "I have seen recordings of human soldiers in battle," Desik added with a shudder. "They scream with rage as they fight. Their bones break and still they crawl toward their enemies. They feel pain but ignore it. They bleed but refuse to fall. No species in the known galaxy fights with such savage determination." Velith felt sick as she listened. Every child in the Sindari Empire grew up hearing stories of the Death Worlders from Sol 3. Humans were the nightmare species that parents used to frighten misbehaving younglings. And now her father wanted her to marry one of them. "I would rather die than wed such a creature," she declared, her voice rising with emotion. The Emperor slammed his staff against the floor, and the sound rang through the chamber like thunder. "You will not die," he commanded. "But millions of our people will perish if the Varax are not stopped. The humans have agreed to defend our borders, but they demand a permanent alliance sealed by marriage. Captain Kang Junseo of the Human Defense Coalition has been selected as your betrothed." Tears streamed down Velith's delicate face. She had dreamed of love since she was a small girl. She had imagined a gentle partner who would hold her tenderly and whisper sweet words beneath the twin moons. Instead, she would be given to a scarred warrior from a world of blood and violence. "He arrives within the hour," her father continued, his tone softening slightly. "You will greet him with dignity befitting our royal house. This is not a request, Velith. This is your duty to our people." The princess fled from the throne room with tears blinding her vision. She ran through marble corridors and past startled servants until she reached her private chambers. There she collapsed upon her bed and wept until her body ached. When the announcement horns sounded across the palace, she forced herself to stand. She washed her face and dressed in formal robes of deep purple. Her handmaidens tried to comfort her, but she waved them away with trembling hands. The welcoming ceremony took place in the grand hall where hundreds of nobles had gathered. Velith stood beside her father's throne and watched the massive doors swing open. Captain Kang Junseo walked in alone. He was smaller than she had expected, standing only slightly taller than an average Sindari. His skin was a warm brown color, and his black hair was cut short against his skull. A thin scar ran across his left cheek, and his dark eyes scanned the room with quiet intensity. He wore a simple military uniform without decoration or medals. His boots made no sound as he approached the throne, and his posture was straight but not aggressive. There was something controlled about his movements, like a predator conserving energy. The nobles whispered among themselves as they studied the human. Some recoiled at his alien appearance, while others stared with morbid curiosity. Valeth felt her heart racing as he stopped before her father and bowed respectfully. "Emperor Sindel, I am honored by your invitation," the human said in accented but clear Sindari. "I come in peace and with hope for friendship between our peoples." The emperor nodded and gestured toward Valeth. "This is my daughter, Princess Valeth. She will be your bride once our alliance is formalized." Kong turned to face her and their eyes met. Valeth saw something flicker in his gaze, perhaps surprise or curiosity, but his expression remained neutral. He bowed again, this time to her. "Princess, it is an honor to meet you." Valeth said nothing. She turned her face away and stared at the wall, refusing to acknowledge his existence. The silence stretched painfully long, and she heard gasps from the watching nobles. Everyone expected the human to react with anger or violence, but Kang simply straightened from his bow. He looked at her for one more moment with those unreadable dark eyes. Then he turned back to the emperor. "I understand," he said quietly. "These are difficult circumstances for everyone. I will wait until the princess is ready." He bowed once more and walked away without protest or complaint. Valeth watched him leave and felt confusion mixing with her anger. Where was the savage beast she had expected? Where was the brutal monster who should have demanded respect? The human had simply accepted her rejection and departed with dignity. She did not understand, and that frightened her more than his scars ever could. The alien princess wept, rejecting the ruthless human her father had chosen. 3 days passed, and Valeth refused to see the human captain. She took her meals alone in her chambers and avoided any part of the palace where he might appear. Her father sent messengers demanding she fulfill her duties, but she ignored them all. Instead, she spent her time gathering evidence. If she could prove how dangerous humans truly were, perhaps her father would reconsider the alliance. She accessed the royal archives and searched for military recordings from human conflicts. What she found made her blood run cold. The footage showed human soldiers fighting against various enemies across dozens of worlds. They moved with terrifying coordination, communicating through hand signals and strange sounds. When one fell, the others did not retreat, but instead fought harder with fury burning in their eyes. She watched the human take 3 plasma bolts to the chest and still crawl forward to drag a wounded companion to safety. She saw another lose an arm and continue firing his weapon with the remaining limb. Their screams of rage echoed through the recordings, primal and horrifying. These creatures did not know when to die. Armed with this evidence, Valeth marched to find Captain Kang. She discovered him in the training grounds where Sindari soldiers practiced their combat formations. He stood at the edge of the field, watching silently as her people trained. "Captain," she called out, her voice sharp with accusation. Kang turned to face her and bowed his head slightly in greeting. "Princess, I am glad you have come to speak with me." "I am not here for pleasant conversation," she snapped. "I want to know the truth about what you are. I have seen the recordings of humans in battle. I have witnessed your species murder and destroy across the galaxy. Tell me, Captain, how many beings have you killed?" The training ground grew silent as soldiers stopped to watch the confrontation. Valeth stood with her arms crossed, waiting for him to lie or make excuses. But Kang did neither. He met her gaze steadily, and his expression carried something she did not expect. It looked almost like sorrow. "Enough to remember every face," he said quietly. "I see them when I close my eyes at night. I hear their final breaths in my dreams. Every life I have taken weighs upon my soul, princess. I do not kill because I enjoy it. I kill because sometimes it is the only way to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Valeth had prepared arguments for denial or boasting. She had no response for honest regret. Before she could recover, a young Sindari soldier stumbled during a drill and fell hard against the ground. The training master shouted at him to rise immediately, but the soldier clutched his leg in obvious pain. Kang moved before anyone else could react. He crossed the field in quick strides and knelt beside the injured soldier. His hands moved gently as he examined the leg, pressing carefully along the bone. "This is sprained, not broken," Kang announced. "He needs rest and cold treatment, not more training." The training master bristled at being corrected by an outsider. "Human, you have no authority here. This soldier must learn to fight through pain." Kang looked up at the master with eyes that suddenly seemed very cold. "Fighting through pain is necessary in battle," he agreed. "But training through injury creates permanent damage. A soldier who cannot walk tomorrow is useless to your empire. Let him heal properly, and he will serve you for decades. Push him now, and you will cripple him forever." Without waiting for permission, Kang lifted the injured soldier in his arms. The young Sindari weighed little compared to human standards, and carried him as easily as one might carry a child. He walked toward the medical building while the training master sputtered with indignation. Valeth followed at a distance, watching the scene with growing confusion. Later that evening, she questioned her handmaiden about the human's activities. The servant girl named Lysara had been assigned to attend to Captain Kang's needs. "He is very strange, Your Highness," Lysara admitted. "The Emperor gave him the finest guest chambers in the palace, with silk beds and golden fixtures. But Captain Kang refused them." "Refused?" Valeth repeated with surprise. "Yes, Princess. He asked to sleep in the soldier barracks instead. He said he wanted to understand the warriors he would fight alongside. Every morning he wakes before dawn and trains with the common troops. He eats what they eat and sleeps where they sleep." This made no sense to Valeth. What kind of privileged military commander rejected luxury to live among ordinary soldiers? Her thoughts were interrupted by alarm sirens screaming across the palace. Red lights flashed through every corridor, and panicked voices shouted about an attack. Valeth rushed to the command center where her father was already receiving reports. "Varak's scout ships have breached our outer defenses," a military officer announced with fear in his voice. "They are conducting raids on the civilian districts. Our response teams are 10 minutes away." The nobles in the room began talking frantically about retreat and safety protocols. Guards surrounded the Emperor to escort him to the secure bunker. Chaos spread as everyone scrambled to protect themselves. Through the madness, Valeth noticed that Captain Kang was not among those fleeing. She spotted him near the exit, checking his weapon and speaking rapidly into a communication device. His expression had transformed from the calm man she had confronted earlier. Now his eyes burned with focused intensity, and his jaw was set with determination. "Where are you going?" she demanded. Kang glanced at her briefly. "The civilian district. There are families there, children who cannot defend themselves. Your response teams will arrive too late. You will die alone against Varak soldiers." The human smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had made peace with death long ago. "Maybe," he said simply, "but those children will live." He ran toward the danger while everyone else ran away. Valeth watched him disappear into the chaos and felt something shift inside her chest. She did not understand this human at all, but she was beginning to suspect that she had been very wrong about him. The alien princess wept, rejecting the ruthless human her father had chosen. Velith made her decision in the space of a single heartbeat. She grabbed a medical kit from the wall and ran after the human. Her guards shouted for her to stop, but she ignored their pleas. The civilian district was only a short distance from the palace, but the journey felt like an eternity. Smoke rose from burning buildings, and the sounds of weapons fire echoed through the streets. Sindari citizens ran in all directions, screaming with terror as Varak soldiers marched through their homes. The Varaks were horrifying creatures. Their bodies were covered in thick black armor and their faces had no eyes, only rows of sharp teeth. They moved with mechanical precision and showed no mercy to anyone in their path. Velith ducked behind a fallen wall and tried to find where Kang had gone. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of human combat. She followed the noise to a small building near the center of the district. Through shattered windows, she could see that it was a children's shelter where young Sindari were hiding from the attack. And standing between those children and a squad of Varak soldiers was Captain Kang Junseo. He fought like nothing she had ever witnessed. The human moved with savage efficiency, using a combination of his rifle and his bare hands. When a Varak soldier lunged at him, he twisted aside and drove his blade into its throat. When two more attacked together, he dropped one with a gunshot and broke the neck of the other with a brutal strike. But he was only one man against many enemies. A plasma bolt struck his shoulder, and he stumbled back with a grunt of pain. Another hit his leg, and he dropped to one knee. The Varaks pressed forward, sensing weakness. Kang looked back at the children huddled behind him. Their small faces were wet with tears, and their bodies trembled with fear. The youngest could not have been more than 4 cycles old. Something changed in the human's eyes. He roared with fury and forced himself back to his feet. Blood poured from his wounds, but he raised his weapon and charged directly at the enemy. The Varaks had never encountered such reckless aggression, and they hesitated for just a moment. That moment was enough. Kang tore through them with terrible violence. He ignored injuries that would have killed any Sindari warrior. His body was failing, but his spirit refused to surrender. By the time the last Varaks fell, the floor was covered with their corpses. Then Kang collapsed. Velith ran to him without thinking. She knelt beside his bloody body and pressed her hands against his wounds. The medical kit was meant for Sindari physiology, but she had to try. "Stay awake," she ordered. "Help is coming. You cannot die." Kang laughed weakly, and blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Concerned about me now, princess? I thought you wanted me dead." "I never wanted anyone dead," she admitted. "I was just afraid. I did not understand your kind." The children emerged slowly from their hiding places. A small girl with silver skin and bright blue eyes approached the fallen human. She looked at his bloody hands and his scarred face, but she did not run away. "Are you the monster?" she asked in a tiny voice. Kang smiled gently despite his pain. "I am just a soldier, little one. Are you hurt?" The girl shook her head, but then held up her arm to show a small cut from falling debris. "It stings," she whimpered. Without hesitation, Kang reached into his vest and pulled out a small bandage. His hands were covered in blood, both his own and that of his enemies. But he wiped them carefully on his shirt before gently wrapping the child's wound. "There," he said softly. "You are very brave. Much braver than me when I was your age." The girl giggled despite everything. Velith watched this scene with tears forming in her eyes. Here was a man who had just slaughtered a dozen enemy soldiers, wounded and bleeding on the ground, and his first concern was a child's tiny scratch. "Why did you come here?" she asked him. "You did not have to risk your life for strangers. You could have stayed safe in the palace." Kang was quiet for a moment as rescue teams finally arrived to secure the area. Medical personnel rushed to treat his injuries, while soldiers escorted the children to safety. "Your people remind me of my little sister," he finally answered. "She was small like you, Sindari, delicate and gentle. She saw beauty in everything, even in a galaxy that could be very cruel. When she was 8 years old, raiders attacked our colony. She did not survive." Valeth felt her hearts breaking at the pain in his voice. "I became a soldier because I never wanted to feel that helpless again," he continued. "I fight so that other little sisters can grow up safely. I fight so that other families never have to experience what mine did. Your children, Princess, they deserve a chance to see tomorrow. That is worth any price." The medical team loaded him onto a transport and rushed him toward the palace hospital. Valeth rode beside him, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. She had called him a monster without knowing anything about him. She had rejected him based on fear and ignorance. But monsters did not weep for lost sisters. Monsters did not risk everything to protect children they had never met. Captain Kang Jinseo was not a monster at all. He was simply a man who had learned that some things were worth dying for. When they reached the hospital, a messenger arrived with urgent news. Varak's intelligence had been captured and analyzed. The main invasion fleet was coming, 50 warships against the Sindari's 12. The council would discuss surrender in the morning. But Kang, barely conscious on his medical bed, whispered 4 words that changed everything. "Let me call friends." The alien princess wept, rejecting the ruthless human her father had chosen. The medical wing of the palace had never been so crowded. Wounded soldiers from both Sindari and human ships filled every bed, and doctors worked without rest to save lives. Vala sat in the hallway outside the intensive care unit, waiting for news that might never come. Kang had survived the initial transport back to the planet, but his injuries were severe. The plasma bolt had torn through his chest and damaged organs that Sindari physicians barely understood. Human medical specialists had arrived from the fleet, but even they could not promise recovery. For 7 days, Valith refused to leave the hospital. She slept in chairs and ate whatever food servants brought her. Her father visited multiple times, urging her to rest in proper quarters, but she would not go. "He saved my life," she told the Emperor. "He saved all of us. The least I can do is be here when he wakes." "If he wakes," her father corrected gently. "When?" Valith insisted. On the 8th day, Captain Park Yuna found her sitting alone in the hallway. The older human woman had commanded the volunteer fleet during the battle and had become something of a legend among the Sindari. "You should know something about Jinseo," Yuna said, taking a seat beside the princess. "He never expected to survive this mission. When he sent out his call for help, he included personal messages for each of us, letters to be delivered after his death." Valith felt fresh tears threatening to fall. He planned to die here? He planned to make his death mean something. Yuna clarified. "That fool has been carrying guilt for 20 years, ever since his sister died. He believes he failed her, that he should have been there to protect her. Every battle since then has been his attempt to earn forgiveness from a ghost." The human woman sighed heavily. "When he told us about the Sindari, about your people, he said you reminded him of her. Small and gentle and worth protecting. He said that if he could save just one innocent child, maybe the universe would finally let him rest." Valith thought about the little girl in the shelter, the one whose tiny wound Kang had bandaged with such care. She thought about all the children who would grow up safely because of what he had done. "He has saved thousands of children," she whispered. "Is that not enough?" Yuna smiled sadly. "For the galaxy?" "Yes. For Jineseo's heart, I do not know. That is something only he can decide." On the 10th day, Captain Kang Jinseo opened his eyes. Valith was at his bedside when it happened, reading reports about the reconstruction efforts across the empire. She looked up and found him watching her with confusion. "Am I dead?" he asked in a weak voice. "No." She laughed through sudden tears. "You are very much alive, though the doctors say it is a miracle." Kang frowned slightly. "That was not the plan. Plans change, Captain. You will have to find a new purpose for living." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. "The Varax fleet? Destroyed or scattered? Your friends won the battle after you disabled the shields. The Sindari Empire is safe." Kang closed his eyes and released a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. Then, "It is over. The political marriage is no longer necessary. Your father can find you a proper husband now. Someone worthy of a princess." Valith felt her heart constrict at his words. "You believe you are not worthy?" "I am a soldier from a death world," he replied without opening his eyes. "I am scarred and broken, and I carry nightmares that will never fade. You deserve someone who can give you peace, not someone haunted by war." "You assume I want peace?" His eyes opened with surprise. What else would a princess want? Valith reached out and took his hand in hers. His skin was rough and calloused, marked by decades of combat, but she did not let go. "When I was young, I dreamed of a gentle partner who would keep me safe in a tower of comfort. But I was a foolish child who did not understand the galaxy. Safety is an illusion. Comfort is meaningless without purpose. I have learned that true love is not about being protected from storms. It is about finding someone who will stand beside you when the storms come." She squeezed his hand tightly. "You taught me that, Jun Seo. You showed me what courage really means. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. You ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. You bled for children you had never met. You threw your body in front of a weapon to save someone who had rejected and insulted you." Kang stared at her with an expression she could not read. "Why would you want such a man?" "Because such a man is exactly who I need," she answered. "My empire will face more threats in the future. My people will need a leader who understands sacrifice. And I will need a partner who reminds me every day why we fight." 1 year later, Princess Valith stood before the Galactic Council as Empress of the Sindari. Her father had abdicated the throne, declaring that his daughter had earned the crown through her courage during the war. Beside her stood her husband, Captain Kang Jinseo, now Prince Consort of the Empire. The council chamber was filled with representatives from 100 different species. Many of them had once looked down upon the Sindari as weak and insignificant. Now they watched with respect as the young empress addressed the assembly. "You call humans ruthless," Valith declared, her voice carrying across the vast hall. "And you are correct, but you misunderstand what that word means." She looked at her husband, who stood straight and proud despite the scars that would never fully heal. "Humans are ruthless in what they love. They give their hearts completely, without reservation or limit. Humans are ruthless in what they protect. They will sacrifice everything, including their own lives, for those they have chosen to defend. And humans are ruthless in the prices they will pay. No cost is too high, no suffering too great, when innocents hang in the balance." The council members shifted uncomfortably as the Empress continued. 1 year ago, a human army came to save my people. They were not soldiers following orders. They were veterans and farmers and merchants who answered a single man's call. They came because friendship meant something to them. They came because honor was more than just a word. She raised her hand toward the viewing windows where human ships still patrolled, alongside Sindari vessels. "Let this be a warning to any who threaten peace in this galaxy. The Sindari Empire now stands with humanity. Our alliance is not political convenience. It is forged in blood and sacrifice and love. Threaten what a human cherishes, and you will learn why the galaxy should be grateful they choose peace." The chamber erupted in applause and debate, but Valeth barely noticed. She turned to her husband and saw tears glistening in his dark eyes. "That was quite a speech," he said softly. "I meant every word." He pulled her into an embrace, and she felt his strong arms wrap around her with impossible gentleness. The scarred warrior who had terrified her now felt like home. "My sister would have liked you," he whispered. Valeth smiled against his chest. "Then I will spend my life trying to make her proud." Together, they walked out of the council chamber and into a future that neither had expected. The alien princess who had wept at her fate now laughed with joy, and the ruthless human she had rejected had become the love she never knew she needed. Some stories end with happily ever after. This one was just beginning. The alien princess wept, rejecting the ruthless human her father had chosen. The council argued for hours about surrender. Voices rose and fell as nobles debated the terms of their defeat. Some wanted to negotiate, while others suggested fleeing to distant colonies. Fear had poisoned every mind in the chamber. Only Valeth refused to accept despair. "Captain Kang requested permission to contact his allies," she announced, standing before her father's throne. "We should give him the chance before we abandon hope." Councillor Marath shook his head with weary resignation. "Child, the Human Defense Coalition has already stated they cannot spare additional ships. Their own borders face threats from the Krelthan Dominion. What friends could one captain possibly have?" "Friends who answer when he calls," Valeth replied. "I have seen what this man will do for strangers. Imagine what those who truly know him would do." Emperor Sindel studied his daughter with curious eyes. Something had changed in her since the raid on the civilian district. The fear she once carried had been replaced by something stronger. "Very well," the Emperor decided. "We will give the human 3 days. If no help arrives, we will begin surrender negotiations." Valeth rushed to the medical wing where Kang was recovering. His wounds had been treated with advanced technology, but he still looked pale and weak. When she entered his room, he was already awake and working on a communication device. "The council has given you 3 days," she told him. Kang nodded without looking up from his screen. "That should be enough. I am sending messages to old friends, soldiers I served with across 20 years of campaigns. Most of them are retired now, living quiet lives on peaceful worlds. Will they come?" Valeth asked with uncertainty. The human finally met her eyes and smiled. "They will come," he said with absolute confidence. "We made promises to each other long ago. When one of us calls, the others answer. That is what family does." 2 days later, ships began appearing at the edge of the Sindari system. They were not military vessels from any official fleet. Instead, they were a strange collection of cargo haulers, mining ships, and outdated warcraft. They arrived in groups of 2 and 3, jumping out of hyperspace with weapons powered and shields raised. The Sindari command center erupted with confusion as they tried to identify the incoming contacts. Councillor Thesic stared at his screen with disbelief. "There are 47 ships arriving," he reported. "They are broadcasting human identification codes, but they do not match any known military formation." Valeth stood beside Kang, who had insisted on leaving his medical bed despite his injuries. He watched the display with tears forming in his eyes. "They came," he whispered. Every single one of them came. A communication signal crackled through the speakers, and a rough human voice filled the room. "Geneseo, you stubborn fool! You thought you could have all the fun without us. This is Captain Park Yuna of the freighter Angry Grandmother. My crew of 60 idiots is ready to crack some Varak skulls." More voices followed, each one greeting Kang with insults and affection. "Kim Dae-young reporting with my mining crew. We brought industrial lasers and bad attitudes. This is Lee Hanna. I was enjoying retirement, but my husband was getting boring anyway. Where do you want us? Ship after ship announced their presence, each crewed by veterans who had dropped everything to answer one man's call. They had no obligation to fight here. They had no political reason to risk their lives. They came simply because their friend needed them. Valeth watched Kang wipe his eyes as he listened to each greeting. These humans had crossed the galaxy on faith alone, trusting that Junseo would not call unless the cause was just. This is Captain Kan Junseo, he finally responded. Thank you for coming. We faced the Varax Collective, 50 warships against our combined 60. The people of the Sindari Empire are depending on us. Are you ready? The response came as a unified roar across the communication channel. We are ready. The battle began 12 hours later when the Varax fleet arrived. Valeth watched from the command center as human ships engaged in tactics that defied all military doctrine. They used asteroids as weapons, crashing mining vessels into enemy formations. They turned cargo containers into explosive projectiles. They flew their damaged ships directly into Varax cruisers, crews evacuating at the last moment before impact. The Varax commanders had never faced such unpredictable opponents. Every logical strategy failed against enemies who fought with creative madness. Human pilots laughed as they performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. But even with all their courage, the humans were losing ships. The Varax outnumbered them, and superior numbers eventually prevailed. Kang gathered a small strike team for a desperate mission. Intelligence had located the Varax command ship, and destroying it would throw the enemy fleet into chaos. The only problem was that the ship's shields made it invulnerable to attack from outside. We need to board the vessel and disable the shields from within, Kang explained to the assembled volunteers. This is likely a one-way trip. I will not order anyone to come. Every human in the room stepped forward. Valeth stepped forward as well. I am coming with you, she declared. I studied Varax ship designs as part of my diplomatic education. I know the layout of their command vessels better than anyone here. Kang shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. You are the princess of this empire. Your people need you alive. My people need victory, she countered. And you need a guide who can navigate that ship. Without me, you will waste precious time searching for the shield generators. With me, you can reach them in half the time. The human stared at her for a long moment. You have changed, princess. You changed me, captain. The boarding mission launched within the hour. Valeth had never felt such terror as their small shuttle approached the Varax command ship. But she had also never felt such determination. Whatever happened, she would not let fear control her again. They breached the hull and fought their way through corridors filled with enemies. Kang and his team moved like wolves, swift and deadly. Valeth guided them through the maze of passages, her knowledge proving invaluable. When they finally reached the shield generator, Kang planted explosives while his team held off waves of Varax reinforcements. Victory was moments away. Then Valeth saw the assassin. A Varax soldier had flanked their position, weapon aimed directly at her. She froze, unable to move. Kang did not freeze. He threw himself between her and the blast. The plasma bolt struck him in the chest and he crumpled to the ground. But even as he fell, his hand pressed the detonator. The explosions ripped through the shield generators and the command ship went dark. Outside, the human fleet unleashed everything they had against the now vulnerable vessel. Within minutes, the Varax flagship was destroyed and the enemy fleet scattered in retreat. Victory belonged to the Sindari Empire. But Valeth knelt on the cold metal floor, cradling the broken body of the man who had saved her life, and she wept harder than she ever had before.